Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the Animals and Society Colloquium series. My name is Carol Glasser and I am the chair of the Animals and Society section of the American Sociological Association. We are one of the co-hosts of the Animals and Society Colloquium series along with the Animals and Society Institute, and we try every month to bring a new speaker who's doing great work in the field of human-animal studies. Today, we are very lucky to have our presentation, The Relational Horse, including animal others' perspectives in our relationships and academic studies. It is going to be presented to us by two fabulous scholars. We have Gala Argent, who is an interdisciplinary scholar whose work concerns human, non-human animal intersections. She holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in communication studies, a PhD in archaeology. Her work concerns theorizing horse-human communication and relationships and how those relationships might be more equitably envisioned. She's lived with and attuned to horses since she was a child. We also have Jeannette Vaught, a lifelong horsewoman and former equine veterinary technician who holds a PhD in American Studies. She teaches at California State University, Los Angeles, and writes about a wide range of topics that can be found at the intersections of animal, agriculture, and technology. I'm very excited for today's presentation. Before I turn it over, I'll just give everyone a reminder to make sure that your audio is turned off, and I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have anything that you want to say during the talk, put it in the chat. And at the end, we'll have Q&A and you'll get a chance to ask questions then. And you can feel free to post things in the chat and I will be monitoring them so I could also ask questions for you. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I will turn the presentation over.
Hello, folks. I'm really excited to be here. And thank you, Carol, for your part in organizing this. It's wonderfully organized. I did have a chance to look at the attendee list, and I'm very excited to see some old and new friends that horses and scholarship around them brought together. I also hope that there are people here who aren't necessarily horse people, because what I'm going to be talking about today has relevance for those who are with or study other animals as well. So just a note that I'm in the country and my Wi-Fi is a little wiggy when it gets when the bandwidth gets big. So I am going to stop my video as I screen share, and I'll be back later. So first, a little bit of my intellectual trajectory as it's relevant to what follows. So horses have been a part of my life since I met and first sat on one at 2 years old. And except for a few years in between, I've bred them, trained them, and lived with them from their births to their deaths. But horses didn't come into my academic focus until long after obtaining my initial degrees. And in communication studies, as Carol mentioned, this is an interdisciplinary field in the US that deals with both qualitative and quantitative research, humanities and sciences and social sciences. And for almost 20 years, I taught courses like interpersonal communication, argumentation and persuasion, and communication theory. So then I got crazy, and as a mature student, I pursued a doctorate in archaeology, and that enabled me to bring these two essential aspects of my life, scholarship and the horses I'd shared lives with. But there was a problem. What I was studying was a culture, an Iron Age culture in the middle of Asia that had buried their horses with their humans. And these people lived with and on their horses like I did. And they were so important to them that they buried their dead with them. But at this point in the early 2000s, within the field of archaeology, they were viewed as material culture. They were objectified as no more important than a cauldron or an arrow. And this didn't jibe with my experience of living intersubjectively with horses. And so I thought, okay, what I need to do here is to find a theory of how humans and horses come together and have relationships to show why these horses were more than objects. Except there wasn't one. And of course, for a doctorate, I couldn't just say, I know this because I know this. So at this point in time, there were really only a couple handfuls of studies across the academic spectrum that dealt with the issue. And important to today's talk, what I had to do and did in my dissertation was develop an interdisciplinary model and theory that explained how human-horse communication and relationships worked. And I did this in order to open up archaeological studies to a more symmetrical and, to my mind, more realistic view of human, non-human animal relationality. So I want to give you a little preview of the overall presentation. With that said, I'm going to cover the human animal studies theory behind this book and the scholarship into human equine relationships. And then Jeannette is going to talk about ways we see forward for human equine studies. Then we'll both talk about how our backgrounds impact our scholarship and how our scholarship influences our relationship with horses, and then end up with a good portion of our time for Q&A. So for my part, I first want to present the two tenets of human animal studies as defined by human animal study. I'm going to say HAS because if you're reading this, it's HAS, human animal studies, as defined by HAS scholar Ken Shapiro, that shaped the overall focus of the book. And first, a little bit about human animal studies as different from studies that just merely include animals. Human animal studies is ecocentric, not anthropocentric. It's post-humanist. It views animals as such, and it views us as able to share meanings with animals. So the first the HAS principle we applied to the book is the field's focus on human-animal relationships. And these are considered implicitly or explicitly as co-constituted. As clarified by Ken, quote, relationships occupy a space between two entities, while anchored in and co-constituted by two distinct entities, which it in turn modifies. A relationship is a distinct phenomenon. For our purposes here, we conceive of a relationship as bidirectional, mutually influential, interactive, context-driven process through which humans and horses engage together to co-create, share, and replicate overlapping identities, realities, and worlds. That's a sentence that's probably off the Fogg Index, but there you go. The second theoretical point that we followed in the book, and this is from the introduction, which is open access, by the way, is Shapiro's seminal and defining endeavor for research, the quest to bring animals into our studies as such, as they live and experience the world independently of our constructions of them. This perspective calls on us to include within our work the animal, quote, in itself, both as an experiencing individual and as a species typical way of being of living in the world, as a more or less equal partner in the relationship, end quote. And we took this as such allowance, indeed we believe requirement, as highly significant to both the interdisciplinary work we presented in our book and to the future of human equine studies and to the relationships with horses that we share themselves. So it follows for us that if we're going to look at human-horse relationships, that endeavor means that we must include the perspectives and lived experiences of those on either side of the horse-human hyphen. That is, we cannot fully address the what of those relationships without taking both sides of the equation into account. This requires a fuller teasing out of the who of the horses. And just as an aside, I want to say that human animal studies, while my particular interest is in dyadic, interpersonal, one-to-one relationships with humans and horses, that's not all that can be done using this framework. We don't have to look at ourselves and our own relationships. We can look at other people, two sets of people and their relationships. We can look at this more broadly than dyadic and look at it from a cultural perspective as well. But the problem is that pulling in animals as such sounds doable. It's proved to be an uphill battle for many reasons. So I want to go through some of the problems with pulling animals in. And really what we're talking about here is different epistemologies, different ways of knowing, and what knowledge counts, what's more credible than another. So academic disciplinary frameworks, go eat breakfast, honey, okay. Go eat breakfast. Yeah. Sorry about that. Academic disciplinary frameworks and formats that serve to border human and animal life worlds into separate categories of experience and study make it difficult to explore interspecies relationships. Within the social sciences, research into human-horse relationships, and here I refer to conventional anthropological, sociological, and psychological studies, are constrained by survivals from these fields' humanist, anthropocentric beginnings. By this, I mean that these fields developed to study humans. There's nothing wrong with that, but here's what those disciplines have to contend with when trying to include animal others. Anthropologists have to wrestle with not only the subject matter of humans versus non-humans, but also with the full panoply of binary distinctions that define humans as opposed to animals. And as an aside, those distinctions are continuously being shot down. Sociologists now, they still have the ghost of George Herbert Mead tapping them on the shoulder to remind them that animals don't belong in our conceptions of self, much less have selves themselves. And this has changed somewhat, but he's still hanging around. Psychology may have fared the best because at least it has subcategories such as comparative psychology that actually look at animal others, and critical psychology that queries issues such as those I'm presenting. Still, those writing in these disciplinary formats are most often, to greater or lesser degree, constrained in both subject matter and method, if they want to stick to format. Moving on to the sciences. What do we know about the sciences? Let's talk about that. So the goals are to describe, explain, predict, and control. The sciences use quantitative methodology. Studies are not to exceed the results of the findings. We all know when we've read scientific studies that they're in the third person, not in the first person. And the attempt is to be objective. But is that the case? Is it really objective? The postmodern demand for reflexivity and contextualization would tell us it is not, that any type of scholarship is influenced by the researcher's past experience, interests, and biases, and that these should be reflexively acknowledged within scholarly works. But apparently that memo either didn't make it to or was ignored by most working within the fields that rely on or indeed demand the use of scientific methodology. And this is not the researcher's fault. It's just that subjectivity is just not done here. And I'm going to return to this in a moment a little bit more. But for now, I want to go into a subset of this scientific methodology within the fields of ethology and applied ethology, because these are often pulled into our studies on horses, and they deal with horses. So here we have Morgan's canon. And Morgan's canon bifurcates human behaviors into higher and non-human behaviors into lower categories. You can read what it states right there. What this does is it discounts mental continuity between humans and animal behaviors. In other words, if we follow Morgan's canon, it's not only appropriate, but also necessary to describe similar human and non-human animal behaviors we might see in similar contexts differently. Now, that sounds a little convoluted, so here are two examples. A mare, for instance, who has lost her foal and will not eat or engage with others, is said to be, using Morgan's canon, experiencing separation anxiety. Compared to a human mother in the same scenario who would be experiencing grief. Humans can have friends, but horses who choose to hang out with particular other horses have preferred partners. Furthermore, many non-human animal behaviors are ascribed to instinct, while seemingly discounting that humans act from instincts too. So despite the conceptions developed and promoted by cognitive ethologists later down the road, Donald Griffin and those following, that the differences between human and non-human animals are of degree rather than kind, adherence to Morgan's canon continues in many of the more scientific ways of studying, viewing, and dealing with other animals. What this does is demote animal ways of being by conceptually separating through language and thus thought as lesser than human ways of being. It can also lead to welfare issues and mistreatment because in minimizing equine emotional states, for instance, we may not give that grieving mare or the horse who has been sold down the road and thus lost his friends the support they need. Well, we've got the dogs chiming in. So moving on to grand narrative constraints. By grand narratives, I mean pervasive beliefs that carry across the culture and are so embedded as to be invisible and unquestioned. And obviously, I'm talking about Euro-American belief systems at this point. So back to the overall header of science. I'm going to classify the reification of science as a grand narrative because it is a pervasive belief within broader culture. And I'm going to step out here and say this. When the paradigm of science, and that's what it is, a paradigm, is viewed as the most important, prime, or only lens through which to view the world of human-animal other relationships, we miss out on what other ways of knowing can tell us about these relationships. So the takeaway here is that there is no one disciplinary framework that has all the answers or is going to give a full picture of who horses are, why horses do what they do, and how best to be in reciprocal relationships with them. Qualitative epistemologies and findings are no less valid than quantitative ones. The second grand narrative constraint I want to discuss is that we can't know what's in another's mind. And I really wish that we could do away with this narrative because it's often pulled out as a means to excuse scholars from attempting to do what we're talking about doing here. And that is bringing animal others into our scholarly works as they are, that is, as more than mere human constructions. So here are a couple counterpoints I've developed to that argument over time. Countering the notion that we can never empathetically know what it is like to be another, human or non-human, psychologist Robert Minchell, my colleague at EKU, notes, quote, being female, gay, Black, or human does not necessarily preclude understanding uniquely male, heterosexual, Asian, or BAT experiences. Remember, non-echolating scientists discovered echolation, end quote. Second, as sociologists Sanders and Arluke point out, allowing that animals are validly, quote, minded, emotional, and intentional, and whose orientations and interests can be spoken for with some degree of validity, has the practical utility of allowing for the construction of effective and mutually rewarding patterns of social interactions, end quote. Specific to horses, horse trainer Rick Lamb notes, quote, can you really know what it's like to be a horse? Not really, But as a human, you have the ability to think in the abstract, to imagine what it might be like, and that gets you close enough, end quote. So I contend to varying degrees that humans can understand what it's like to be and live life as a horse. Indeed, with horses, we must do this in order to stay safe handling 1,000-pound animals. So I know there are students here, and I know there are people that have felt stymied in how to pull animals into their scholarly work. So what I've put together here is a little roadmap for how to bring animal others' perspectives into our work. Number one, remember that no disciplinary framework is better than another. A study is a study is a study. They will vary in how dense, readable, believable, or persuasive they are, but none of this should pertain to which disciplinary theory or methods are used. My own academic writing style was once described to me at a conference as stream of consciousness. And in a way it is, but hey, it's a thing. It really is a thing. I don't follow a disciplinary format. I use a qualitative hermeneutic approach to explain and interpret, and that is no less valid than a scientific approach. Second, crossover, go inter or transdisciplinary. Now, this may or may not fly for a thesis or a dissertation, and that depends on a couple of things. Whether or not you are doing a disciplinary work for a degree in courses of study that focus on human animal studies and related fields, it would probably work. For a specific disciplinary work that follows formats but includes animals, it might not float with your supervisors. So there's something else you can do. Use human animal studies literature and related, such as anthrozoology and multi-species ethnography, to endorse and substantiate your approach. This is what I did in the early 2000s, and I felt like I'd found the golden ring when I came upon human animal studies, and it helped me immensely. Next, use this book. If you're writing about horses, we've got 13 chapters by people using different disciplinary approaches, and you can model after that. Finally, reach broadly and keep reaching. If your interest is in including animal others' ways of being in your work, immerse yourself in academic information schemes other than your own, their findings, theory, and methodology. Look at what works, what doesn't work, and why. And when it comes to understanding and including other animals' perspectives, don't shy away. Bring what you learn back, not only to your scholarships, but also to your ways of being with horses. Rinse, repeat, never stop doing this. Finally, I'm going to wrap up for the implications of all of this for our human-horse relationships. I think it should be apparent that some of the paradigms I've discussed have negatively impacted our relationship with horses and horses themselves. They have taken us with our big cerebral cortexes and the cogitation that they do off in the wrong direction. My goal and my wish here is that we tackle the difficulties with bringing horses themselves into our scholarly works in the same way that we explore the possibilities of these interspecies relationships themselves. Relationships form, develop, and deepen in a dialogic space, a platform that looks at the situation from more perspectives than one, creates room for discussion, and seeks mutually beneficial consensus. In this space, all parties have a choice. As my dear Della did here as a foal, when I spontaneously scooped up my toddler Miles and put him on her back with no tack, all parties must be granted the agency to say, I'm not sure about this, but I'll try it because of who you are to me. All parties must also be able to have the agency to say, no, I don't want to do this. This is where true relationships form, grow, and flourish, and where synchrony takes place. In being together with others who understand, respect, and possibly even cherish us. And this, for me, is the possibility I choose to explore and live. Thank you. Jeannette.
All right, so you want to unshare and I'll share
I
mine.
do.
All right, so I'm just going to pick up really where Gala left off here and hopefully be able to make that full screen for you all. Okay, so picking up at, this set of questions that Gala has set up for us about the importance of applying Haas frameworks to our scholarship and how do we do that and why is this so important, right? And thinking also about the future of scholarship and also the future of our lives with horses. I have a couple ideas from the book, right, of course, that will get us in kind of a future-oriented mode and how to do this kind of work. Gala brought up several obstacles, right, to getting at the who of the horse, including kind of Euro-American dominant paradigms, disciplinary constraints, and these apply not just in scholarship, but also in our lived relationships. But thinking particularly about scholarship, right, how to approach these obstacles now and into the future. Of course, expansion into more disciplines is needed, right? We need to be able to expand the field of human animal studies by becoming much more inclusive of non-Western, non-dominant points of view, methodologies that kind of plumb the outer edges of what we know and what can be known, right? That are kind of epistemologically brave and courageous. And also we need to learn more human equine histories. I think, Gala, your story about your work in archaeology was really inspiring in this way, right? We're looking at a different kind or a new kind of human equine history really spawned the ability to think differently about it and to come at this history with a new set of questions. So the more histories we know and the more histories we make space for in the field, the more opportunity there is for that. And space, of course, needs to also be cleared and protected for more kinds of collaboration and disciplinary cross-pollination. So international collaborations, interdisciplinary collaborations, more inclusions of queer and indigenous, anti-racist and decolonizing perspectives in human animal studies is really needed in order to bring the full force of these theories and ideas and ways of seeing the world to bear on not just human equine relations, but also multi-species studies more broadly. And if we think particularly how to move forward with horses, not just in terms of scholarship, but in life, right? With the horses that we love, with the horses that we know, in relationship together. I know there's many horse people here as well who might not be deeply scholarly in their approach to their day-to-day lives, which is totally valid, but who want to think about, the ways in which their relationships with horses can be improved in the present and the future. I think there's several ways that we can work towards that. So first here, right, making ethological and multidisciplinary human animal studies knowledge more accessible and more applicable to more horse people. I think of Lucy Ree's chapter in this book and how much I was like, oh, if only every stable could read this chapter and like reconfigure their entire equine world, but based on this actual knowledge about how horses actually relate to each other. It could make such an incredible welfare difference in so many horses' lives. Breaking free of kind of outdated and harmful understandings of how horses should or could act, right, can just have immediate impacts on how we already look at the ways in which our horses live and how we can make changes towards more welfare. Of course, planning for human animal studies informed short-term and long-term effects of climate change on equine care. This is a really big deal to me and hopefully to many of us, looking at how climate changes as well as oncoming or ongoing climate migrations are affecting the lives of horses. My horse Dallas currently lives in Texas and they've been really struggling both from cold, if you all remember the incredible ice storm of February 2021, and from incredible heat, even by Texas standards. And this year they're really facing a lot of difficulty being able to get alfalfa. So climate change is affecting horses' lives right now. So thinking about how we can meet these challenges in kind of an interconnected, interdisciplinary way that is informed by human animal studies methodologies, that includes the perspectives of horses and their experiences as we begin to really take on the challenges of climate change. I think that's an incredibly important field for us to be keeping an eye on, and for practitioners to be keeping in mind the experiences of their horses and thinking ahead to what those experiences are going to look like, not in the far future, but in the near future. Related to that, this third tenet here, this third bullet point, equine industries are going to be challenged and changing over the next several decades. And some equine industries are going to be less tenable and less available, of course, because of climate change and also other kinds of economic pressures. And so thinking about how do we, look to the future and manage these changes using has informed principles to plan for a just transition, right? Just as we think about just transitions from extractive energy industries to more renewable energy industries, I think a similar kind of paradigm for equine industries is also on the horizon. So thinking about how to transition both horses and people into a very different set of circumstances over the next several decades is an important piece of this puzzle too, moving forward. And as we meet all of these challenges coming down the road, or people are currently facing now, committing to shaping a future, right, for horse and humans together that doesn't perpetuate entrenched patterns of wealth disparity between the haves and have-nots, which contributes not only to welfare suffering for horses, but also for people as well. And that doesn't perpetuate existing human and non-human inequities in terms of access to resources to be able to live healthy lives and the ability to be together as we move forward. So that would be, as we move forward with horses, these kind of deep practical concerns that the theories that Gala brought up can have a real impact. All right.
All right.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. I'd like to open it up to the audience. If anyone has specific questions that they would like to ask, you can go ahead and raise your hand and I can call on you, or you can put a question in the chat. I can get us started with a question. One of the things that I was thinking of, I don't do work with horses. Some of the work that I do is spay and neuter. And one of the things that I've found is a real promise of human animal studies is that we're studying things that just haven't always been studied before. Very basic studies might sometimes be the first time anyone's tried to systematically study something. Like I did a study of attitudes towards spay and neuter among people who don't actually live with other animals. And that seems basic, but we need to know that information if we want city councils to pass ordinances, right? We need to know what the general population thinks. And one of the things I struggled with was how do we get this really important information that we already struggle to make other academics see how important it is, but then how do we also translate that to the people who need it in order to create change for other animals? And I'm just thinking about things that are in your book that if we could get them into the hands of horse people would help horses. Have you found strategies and ways to do those sorts of things?
Gala, what are your thoughts?
Jeannette, what are your thoughts?
I guess my first thought, right? I mentioned Lucy Rees's chapter in our book about synchrony and the relationships that horses kind of constantly negotiate. And speaking just about this one chapter and this one set of pieces of information, right? I feel like if we could do a better job as academics getting this information out to equine studies curricula, right? To kind of really encourage the use of human animal studies methodologies in equine studies curricula, where many times, and I know this from friends that I grew up with, right, who went on to universities to get equine studies degrees to run barns and be a professional trainer and all that. They learn business, they learn management, they learn the kind of agricultural side of things and the scientific side of management, but there's very little inclusion of humanities and interdisciplinary perspectives, right? Like there's just not a whole lot of melding in those programs or inclusion of human animal studies or humanities work. And so they're missing out actually on a lot of these really important pieces of information. Like actually there's no such thing as an alpha mare, right? And if you're building your entire barn around these paradigms, right, that are so culturally dominant, but not actually reflected in the ethological research, then you're really, you're really missing out on a lot of the benefits that these perspectives can provide. So I know that's not really answering the question of like, what are the solutions you have found, but we are really trying to, look at these gaps where, welfare can be impacted immediately, and how can we get information that's needed to people who are already studying to become professional horse people, and advocate for the inclusion of more human animal studies perspectives in those nodes of students who are going to be using that information and actually impacting the lives of hundreds or thousands of horses over their lifetime.
And it is, thanks, Jeannette. It is a tough thing. And it is, I think, a goal that I have, and I haven't quite sorted out how to go about it, but I'll tell you a little anecdote. And that's that I have a friend who runs a large barn. I think they have 50 horses, and told her about the book. And I gave her my chapter to read. And she called me up and said, oh my God, can you come present this to, we could do a presentation because people need to hear this. And I think, Jeannette, that you and I talk about this in the afterword of the book, that we came up in ways that that people are still coming up as they're being trained to be with horses. And these are their beliefs, like horses don't learn socially, horses don't remember each other or us. Horses need to be made to do what we say. And everyone who has come up in that world, that Euro-American world of horsemanship, has horror stories about that they look back on and wish that they hadn't done that. Another one horse is as good a companion for another horse as any other horse. Horses don't feel emotions. Horses get sold down the road, ripped away from their friends, and they do have friends, and are expected to go to work often in these stables the next day without acknowledging their grief and what they need. So this is what happened to me when I came to studying horses after a lifetime of being with them. Is it changed my way of being with horses. And I was always very intuitive and connected with my horses in ways that fell outside of that realm. But the need to modify our own beliefs and ways of being with horses based on what we learn is something that it has been an invaluable step in my own evolution as a person, much less as a horse person. So yeah, how do we get that out there? My question to my friend when I said, well, can I do a PowerPoint, right? And it's like, I'll have to figure out how to target that audience and to get some of these messages across without a PowerPoint. But we hope to do more of that. And we have Jeannette and I have plans for some future work that will hopefully be able to do more of that.
Thank you. I do hope you get more of this out there. It's so important. We have a lot of activity now. So we have something in the chats from Janine that I'll start with because it follows from what you were just talking about. And then then I have a queue of people I put in the chat. The order will go in. So Janine says, my question follows on from this question. I work with high-end sports horses. I have a history with horses and a lot of intuitive knowledge, and I have rarely gotten it wrong so far in decision-making for their well-being at a basic level. I am also finding it tough to be heard without the science, or this is not how we've always done it. And she gave, for example, the sale of horses is a huge concern of mine. It's part of my business, but I want to absolutely change that process. So how can we confidently challenge those notions that it's tough to be heard without the science, or this is not how we've always done it?
Janine, I want to just jump in and say that what you're saying about that experience resonates 100% with feelings I've had and experiences I've had. And Gala, I think that's the same for you. Where there there have been many times in our lives where we've been that weird person at the bar, right, who's actually advocating for horses when the system is designed to not allow space for that. So in that sense, I think that's a very valid feeling, and I'm so glad that you're here and answering that or asking this question. I think that, you know, in terms of finding justification for standing up to that system and changing the system in the way that you can in your own barn and in your own kind of professional situation, there, I would say, you know, of course, there's tools in this book, there's research in this book, entire introductions to different kinds of fields of research where standing up for horses is actually, you know, very much supported by the findings that scholars have made in terms of kind of changing the way that we think about selling horses and transitioning them in different places, different relationships. And so having that behind you and being able to say, well, there's the scholarship in ecology, there's a scholarship in psychology, there's this entire field of human animal studies that supports what it is that you want to do. That might be a tool that you can lean on while you're pressing on those issues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, oh, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry. Go on.
That's okay. I just had a comment around that too. And one of the things I totally understand the question. And one of the things I see is that social media has become a good way of challenging some of these things. But one of the most annoying instances that I see in relation to that particular scenario where we have to look at the science is people misusing, and this has crept into the horse world outside of academia, and misusing the concept of anthropomorphism to mean that you can't speak for horses' interests. You're being anthropomorphic if you're saying that this horse is grieving, or this horse could grieve, or this horse is feeling whatever emotion. So that's a problem. One of the things that I do is I teach a course called Horse that's interdisciplinary and human animal studies based at Eastern Kentucky University. And my students are in large part going into, there's a minor in human horses and health. And so they are going into equine assisted therapies or occupational, using horses in occupational therapy settings. And one of the ways I've set it up is to say, okay, here's some scientific studies. Here's how anthropology looks at this. Here's how Gala's hermeneutic method looks at this. Now let's talk about what's valid. And I have a discussion question. What has the most beef behind it that you're going to buy into? And it's and I'd say it's 85% across the board. It's still science. So that is a really tough hurdle to jump over. And I'm not sure I know the answer, but I do know that by the time my students leave and go out into the horse world, they're looking at horses differently than they do when they came in.
Thank you. And now, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but Rise Evans, if you have a question.
Yes, hello, greetings from Norway.
Please. Hi.
Hi, where I have to apologize. I'm actually cooking my dinner for the first time in weeks because I've been traveling. So you'll see here, I've got it's nearly 8 p.m. So, yeah, it's good to see everyone and to hear both of your presentations, Jeannette. First time I've met you. Nice to see. And Gala, it's really great to see you again.
Good to see you.
I want to make a report from the fringes, and I mean this is in no way critiquing what either of you have presented. I mean, that's something that we can spend lots of time doing in sort of, you know, in constructive fine-tuning of our details as we refine our agenda. But I wanted to say, first of all, Gala, your story, isn't it not the story that we all have faced trying to challenge academics to figure out what we already have known and experienced, often with our bodies. I mean, this is and social. You know, we've started on social science. You know, and now we're talking about science, right? But it is, in many ways, it's quite similar. You know, like Linda Burke talks about. You know, how in traditional horsemanship, the horse is socialized to human society, and vice versa. Maybe in natural horsemanship. I mean, we can argue about the details, right? But that's a pretty powerful thing to think about. That the horse is socialized to meet human society. And isn't that what we've been talking about? As long as we have that attitude, then we don't have to really care what goes on inside its head. It just has to learn to behave. And I was taught traditional horsemanship as an innocent outsider. And I mean, I was shocked. I was writing papers about Foucauldian, discipline of the body and all of that kind of thing. I mean, it seems so clear. So I'd like to hope that we are all in, fighting the good fight against that, and that what has the questions that have been asked even and are, precisely around that. And it's interesting, however, to me. Here it is in 2022. I will be 69 years old in a month. And when I got started in this because of horses, I was looking at, as a human geographer, I was looking at a phenomenon. We were looking for a new livery yard for our horse, and we had a choice of 23 livery yards in the hills outside Cardiff. And so then we had to have criteria, and all of that. And I suddenly realized, damn it, people pay money for the best place for their horse. I'm a geographer. Money is power in landscape. What's going on here? 27 livery yards within a 5-kilometer square. Who's written about this? Nobody, right? Nobody. And isn't the best academic scholarship those people who find things that are blindingly obvious that nobody else has ever written about before? I mean, I've had this conversation with Richard Rorty, exactly that, and he says if you look at the good stuff, they're all telling you about things that are the details out of their lives. And so here is another justification for doing what we're doing, which is trying to find a sclerotic academic system. Within the sclerotic academic system, find a way of describing what we already know, a way that satisfies and that leads to, as has been so admirably the point, a better understanding of our ethical relationship with other animals. So it was about, I don't know, a few years later, I set it as my, if you will, my aspiration that by the time I retired, human-horse relations would be a legitimate topic of academic interest. Because it wasn't really in 2009. And I think we made a lot of progress. I think we're getting there, and there's certainly no time to give up. And I think this seminar, this workshop, is a really good example of it. But I want to also, I said I'm talking from the fringes here. For my sins, I am the president of the Horse Commission of the European Association of Animal Sciences. We met in Porto in September. There was 1,400 presentations. They're all scientists. They're organized according to animal breed, pig commission, horse commission, insect commission. They're all, scientists. I'm the only president who's a social scientist. I'm the only one who doesn't publish in all those science.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt really quickly and ask if you have a direct question, just because we have 3 questions waiting and only 10 minutes left. So I want to make sure that everyone gets their question in.
Of course. I mean, the point in this is that I've been infiltrating this organization for 6 or 7 years now. And the thing I want to put forward here is how can we envisage relationships with scientists that are positive? Give me, Gala, especially, what you were saying there. And I have to say that in Porto, I ran a session on social license to operate for animal death, animal slaughter, animal care, animal welfare. And 7 of the commissions signed up to participate in it because they actually do think about this. They actually do think about their animal subjectivity too, but they're not allowed to research it in their laboratories, mostly, except for in the horse commission, where we do things, like temperament, behavior, and those kind of things. And so I want to challenge Jeannette and Gala to think about how can we reach across that divide as well, and not exclude those scientists, because they are the ones who are going to create that knowledge, that the people who are taking stable management will learn and study. I mean, have you had any thoughts about that?
Grace, yeah, I'm going to go ahead just and jump in super quickly. My own background is in veterinary training and as a veterinary technician, and coming with deep familiarity of exactly, a piece of that world you're describing. And of course, it's so tricky and thorny in that world because there's so much care and so much care for welfare and horse health and animal health, right? Yeah. And there's also long traditions of constraints to how that care can manifest. And so, my work is right at that intersection. My chapter in this book is about artificial insemination and all of the ethical, kind of thorns that happen there, but with deep respect for veterinary work, but also kind of historically contextualizing it. So I am right there with you, Reese.
Yeah, we had, in fact, a leader of a European veterinarian.
I'm sorry, I'm going to move us on because there are 3 questions and we only have 7 minutes. So Jenny, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you for the interesting discussion. It's really a shame to have to cut it short at this stage. Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, good. 2 comments and 1 question. I try to be very concise. First, I'm working in Finland, residing in Spain, and working in the universities of Helsinki and Eastern Finland. And I'm in the very fortunate position of having to disagree with the claim that there is the lack of subjective views in science, because that's kind of the culture where I was taught in, and what I also teach in the methodology classes, that there can't be such thing as scientific objectivity as we know it.
We lost Jenny. Jenny, we lost you. I'm sorry. Hopefully we'll get to loop back to you at the end, but you're completely frozen. So perhaps I can quickly read one of our questions that is online, and then we'll go to Kim if we don't get Jenny back. Susan says, equine studies curricula is great avenue for promoting awareness, maybe earlier in pony clubs too. Can you please say more about how the book came together, such as talking about things like networks, the Living with Horses events, etc.?
Mm-hmm. The book did come together. The initial, this book was a long time in the making. For me, I think I mentioned that when I was starting out, there were only a couple handfuls of studies that I could rely on that dealt with human-equine relationships. And so I convened a session at the Association of Social Anthropologists of the UK and Commonwealth. I always get that wrong, but in Wales, and that was it was interdisciplinary, even though this was an anthropological setting, and many of the chapters came from that, and it was an incredible series. It ended up going from one session to all day long, and it gave me friends and people to think with, and this was in 2011, that really congealed into many of the chapters in the book and my own ways of looking at what we were doing. And then that's carried on through the Living with Horses conference that I do every 2 years. And Jeannette is coming in with me on this next one coming up. And I will email you guys information on that when all the attendees, when we finalize that. And then just one quick comment about Jenny, and that is that I get what she's saying, that it is subjective. I also teach cultural anthropology, and I have a hard time finding a book that's in the US that doesn't that allows for subjectivity in the researcher's perspective. I have to use a book from Europe. So social anthropologists in Europe have a different perspective than cultural anthropologists in the US. We're way behind here.
Thank you. Jeannette, do you mind if I have Kim ask her question before you weigh in on that? Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure everyone gets their question in. Kim, what is your question?
Hi there. Thank you. Hi, Gala. Nice to meet you, Jeannette. Thank you both so much for this book. I'm coming from the University of Iowa, and I'm coming from American Studies, Performance Studies, and Queer Studies. And since you've expressed your commitment to incorporating more queer and Indigenous, as well as anti-racist perspectives into our work, which I've been endeavoring to do, I'm just wondering to hear your thoughts on what to do about pronouns in speaking of horses as well, you know, as human animals in this moment when people are choosing their pronouns, gender identities are more fluid, and so on. So this is probably a huge topic, but if you have some first thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and jump in on that, Kim. Thanks for that question. I am also kind of struggling with this question. I don't have necessarily a set response to it yet, right? I'm really working through it in the scholarship, but the scholar that I've turned to the most recently for kind of multi-species Indigenous and gender scholarship is Kim Tallbear. And she has a really incredible blog thinking about making scholarship more public and accessible as well. She's an incredible inspiration for that. But the blog that she's been working on that I've been digesting is called Critical Polyamory. And it investigates, of course, the kind of blurring of boundaries in terms of how we define love, how we define attachment, how we define relationship, both sexual and not. And it also really goes into these ideas about indigeneity, gender identity, and what we can learn from Indigenous perspectives about, kind of really busting through the Euro-American gender identities that constrain us even when we're thinking about animals. So no prospect yet in terms of what I have decided to do, but I'm then really dealing with digesting that information now, and she's the one that's helping me the most.
And I think in terms of my own work, when I first started publishing, I caught flack in the peer review process for using subjective pronouns, which I have always done in my work. But 20 years ago, this wasn't very accepted. It's objectifying to call any animal it. It's do not, they're not subjects. And so I use in my own work, if I'm talking about a mare, I use she, and if I'm talking about a gelding or stallion, I use he or I use they. And I think we need to see more of that, because it isn't just denotation, it's the connotation, it's the underlying objectification that goes along with that and perpetuates that same objectification.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And of course, there's also the struggle of us, pronouning them. Right.
Right.
So anyway.
But at least we're not itting them.
Right. Well, good. Well, maybe we can have a colloquium just on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, we are at time. So we are going to have to head out. This has been recorded and it will get sent out to everyone who is registered. So if you do have a friend who couldn't make it, just let them know that they can see the recording, and it'll eventually be published online on the Animals and Society section website and shared with ASI. If you're not currently to be in the Animals and Society section, you do have to be a member of the American Sociological Association, but I believe anyone can get on the Animals and Society Institute's email list. Just Google Animals and Society. So if you're not already on that email list, you really, really want to be, because there's always great information and you'll be made aware of all of these colloquiums. I would like to thank everybody so much for coming, and thank you so much for our speakers. This was a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Carol, so
Thank
much
you,
for having us.
Carol.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
All.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.